The morning fog rolled over St. Mary's Harbor like a tired ghost. Harold Mason stood by the pier, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He watched the sea, quiet, gray, endless. It looked peaceful. But he knew better. The ocean never truly sleeps. He used to command submarines decades ago. Now at 76, he came to the docks every morning, just to hear the sound of the waves hitting steel. To him, that sound was memory. To everyone else, just noise. "Captain Mason?" A young officer approached, out of breath. It was Lieutenant Clark, barely 30, all crisp uniform and bright eyes. "The Admiral asked for you, sir. They're testing the new submersible today." Harold didn't answer right away. He took another sip of cold coffee, watching the gulls fight over a piece of bread. "Let me guess," he said. "They finally built something they think can outsmart the sea?" Clark smiled nervously. "They named it Sentinel X." Harold chuckled. "Sounds like a video game. Let's see if it survives salt water." At the base, everything gleamed. Polished metal, glass, and new recruits who had never known the smell of diesel or the fear of silence 100 meters down. Admiral Reynolds waited near the command deck. He was younger than Harold had expected, the kind of man who led with spreadsheets, not salt in his veins. "Captain Mason," Reynolds greeted. "Glad you could make it. We'd like you to observe the dive." "Observe?" Harold asked. "Or babysit." Reynolds smiled faintly. "Let's call it perspective. You've seen things no sonar ever will." The words hung between them like fog. Harold simply nodded. Down at the dock, Sentinel X waited. Sleek, black, shaped like a blade cutting through water. Its surface reflected the sunrise, sharp and gold. The crew moved quickly, checking valves, cables, screens. They looked like children inside a monster they didn't yet understand. Harold placed his hand on the hull, cold metal under his fingers. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he could smell the oil and hear the heartbeat of his old sub, Trident Deep. The one that never returned. Clark stood nearby, watching him. "Sir," he said quietly, "you knew every system on the old class by heart, didn't you?" Harold smiled. "Back then, the system was simple. If it leaked, we fixed it. If it broke, we prayed." The lieutenant laughed, but his voice trembled. Harold turned to him. "Clark, the sea doesn't care about our titles. It only respects those who listen." "Listen to what, sir?" "To the silence," Harold said. "It speaks louder than commands." Inside the sub, everything was different. No smell of oil. No hum of engines. Just smooth panels and synthetic air. The world had gone sterile. Reynolds' voice came through the intercom. "Depth authorization confirmed. You're clear for the dive." Clark looked at Harold. "You ready, Captain?" Harold gave a slow nod. "Always." The sub trembled, then sank gently, then faster. Water darkened. Light disappeared. Soon there was only pressure, only breath, only the sound of machines. At 70 meters, Clark broke the silence. "Feels too quiet." "That's because you're still waiting for noise," Harold said. "Noise means you're alive. Silence. That's when the ocean starts to listen." The young man swallowed. "Do you think it's listening now?" Harold looked into the black, through the viewport, where the water swallowed everything. "It always is." At 100 meters, a faint echo pulsed through the sonar, soft, rhythmic like a heartbeat. Clark frowned. "Could be interference." Harold leaned in. "No, that's something else." "What then?" Harold closed his eyes. His lips barely moved. Memory. The pulse grew louder, steady, almost human. Clark looked scared now. "Should I report it?" "Sir?" Harold shook his head. "Not yet. Some things aren't meant for reports. The signal came again. 3 beats, pause 2 beats. The same pattern from Trident Deep, the lost sub. Clark whispered, "Captain, that's your old ship's signature." Harold didn't speak. He only whispered back, "Then she's still down there, and she's still listening." The sea, vast and cold, answered in silence. Hours passed under the surface. The light above had long disappeared, replaced by the endless, black weight of the deep. Inside Sentinel X, the hum of the engines became the heartbeat of the crew. Even breathing sounded too loud. Clark stared at the sonar screen, pale green waves pulsing across it. The rhythmic echo continued, faint, persistent. "Depth, 150 meters, the helmsman reported. Harold didn't answer. He was focused on that pulse. It wasn't just a sound. It was a pattern, one he'd memorized long ago during training, back when Trident Deep was still his command. 3 short tones. Pause. Too long. Distress code. But Trident Deep had gone missing 40 years ago. Clark leaned toward him. "You think this could be—" Harold raised a hand. "Don't finish that sentence." The sub kept ascending. Pressure thickened like invisible walls closing in. Outside, the dark water pressed against the glass with a patience older than time itself. Reynolds' voice came over the comms. "Captain Mason, status report." Harold hesitated. "All systems operational. But we're picking up an unidentified echo." "Probably geological," Reynolds replied. "Stay on course." Harold's jaw tightened. He had heard that tone before, from men who had never looked into the eyes of the abyss. He turned to Clark. "Bring her to 180 meters. Slow descent." Clark hesitated. "The Admiral—" "I said slow descent, Lieutenant." The steel in Harold's voice was quiet, but final. The young officer obeyed. At 185 meters, the sonar came alive. The ping wasn't random anymore. It was responding, matching their rhythm, like a voice answering back. Clark looked up. "It's communicating." Harold nodded slowly. "Aye. But the question is, who's talking to us?" Then it came. A second pulse, this time stronger, sharper. An outline flickered on the sonar. Faint, but unmistakable. A massive structure buried under sediment, shaped like a submarine. "Good Lord," Clark whispered. Harold's eyes didn't move from the screen. "She's still here." Reynolds' voice crackled through again. "Captain Mason, report your position." Harold took a breath. "Position steady at 185. We've found something, Admiral." Static filled the line, then silence. When Reynolds spoke again, his voice had changed. "You are ordered to surface immediately." Clark's hands froze above the controls. "Sir," Harold stared at the comm. "No." "What?" "We're not leaving." He turned toward the viewport. The blackness outside seemed alive, pulsing faintly with that same rhythm. Reynolds' voice sharpened. "This is a direct order, Captain." Harold leaned forward, his hand brushing the metal. "Admiral, with all due respect, some ghosts deserve to be found." And he cut the transmission. The crew exchanged looks, uneasy. Clark's voice was soft. "Sir, what if this isn't... what if it's something else?" Harold smiled faintly. "Everything down here is something else, son." He motioned to the sonar operator. "Take us closer. 50 meters." The hum of the engines deepened. Outside, the dark shifted, not moving, but breathing. The shape on the sonar grew clearer. A massive hull, cracked open, its insignia barely visible. "Trident Deep," Clark whispered. "Impossible." Harold's hands trembled as he reached for the viewport. "That's her." A sound filled the cabin, low, metallic, like a whisper through the hull. The sonar blinked erratically, and then words. Not real words, but a pattern of tones forming their old command sequence. The one only Harold knew. Clark looked at him terrified. "What's it saying?" Harold swallowed hard. "It's calling my name." Then, a thud. Something hit the sub from below. The lights flickered. A shiver ran through the hull like a warning. "Engines to standby," Harold ordered. "Sir, we're losing power." Harold's gaze remained fixed on the sonar, now flashing red. Another thud. Then a long, haunting sound that seemed to come from everywhere. Clark whispered, "Is that her crew?" Harold closed his eyes. 40 years, he said quietly. 40 years they've been waiting for someone to listen. The sub drifted in the dark, surrounded by the silent ghosts of the past. The minutes passed. Then, from the black void beyond the glass, a faint glimmer, light moving slowly, impossibly deep. It wasn't mechanical. It moved like it was breathing. "Alive," Clark's voice cracked. "What is that?" Harold whispered. "Hope or a warning?" The light came closer. The sonar screamed. And then everything went silent. The only sound left was Harold's heartbeat, steady and calm. He looked up at the dark and whispered, "I hear you." The sea answered with a pulse, the same rhythm that began it all. 3 short, 2 long, the language of the deep. The cabin was drenched in red emergency light. The silence was crushing. Even the sound of breathing felt too loud. Somewhere in the dark, Sentinel X floated motionless, surrounded by the quiet rage of the sea. Clark's voice broke the stillness. "Power's flickering again, sir. We're down to 30%. Harold didn't move. He stood near the viewport, his eyes fixed on the faint shimmer, still pulsing in the abyss. It wasn't fading. It was waiting. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "run a manual systems check. If the core fails, we'll need to bring her up by hand." Clark hesitated. "Sir, are we even sure we can bring her up?" Harold smiled, thin and tired. "The ocean lets you go only if it wants to." Minutes crawled. Every light in the control room seemed to dim one by one. Only the sonar glowed, soft green, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then, through the static, a voice. Old, warped by distance but human. "This is Trident Deep, requesting surface clearance." Clark's eyes widened. "That's impossible." Harold froze. He recognized the voice instantly. Commander Lewis, his second in command from 40 years ago. A man who died the day the sea took his ship. Harold moved closer to the console, his voice trembling. "Lewis, is that you?" Static hissed. Then the voice again, faint, distant. "Trident Deep, systems critical. Holding at 400 meters." Clark's hands shook. "Sir, this has to be a recording." But Harold shook his head. "No, we never made it that far down." The sub creaked under pressure. Every metal plate groaned like a memory resurfacing. Clark grabbed the railing. "We need to leave. Right now." Harold didn't move. He stared into the dark, listening. He could almost hear it, the faint murmur of his old crew, echoing through the water. "We're not leaving them," he whispered. "Sir, they called my name." He turned sharply, his voice stronger now. "I won't abandon them again." Reynolds's voice burst through the comms, full of static and fury. "Mason, surface immediately. You're off protocol." Harold stepped to the mic. "With all due respect, Admiral, protocol doesn't reach this deep." "Damn it, Harold, you're risking everyone on board." "Maybe," Harold said softly. "But I've lived 40 years knowing I left my men behind. I won't die with that echo still in my head. And with that, he cut the line again. The sub sank lower. 200 meters, 250. Every meter was a heartbeat. Every creak, a whisper of the dead. Clark wiped sweat from his forehead. Sir, hull integrity's dropping. We can't take much more. Harold nodded. Then we find them fast. Outside the viewport, the faint shimmer grew, twisting into shapes, outlines that looked like shadows of men moving through the dark. Clark gasped. What the hell? Harold leaned forward, pressing his hand to the glass. Steady. Don't move. They won't hurt you. The figures drifted closer, illuminated by the faint blue light of the sonar. Helmets, uniforms, faces that looked both alive and gone. Clark whispered, Is this real? Harold didn't answer. He whispered instead, Lewis, report. The radio crackled. This is Trident Deep. Reactor breach contained. Awaiting orders, Captain. Tears stung Harold's eyes. His voice broke. Stand by, son. We're coming for you. The sub tilted suddenly. An alarm blared. Pressure spike, Clark shouted. We're losing balance. Harold grabbed the controls, stabilizing by instinct. The hull groaned again, but held. Outside, the shimmer began to fade, replaced by total black. Then, through the void, a new sound, long and deep, like metal grinding against stone. The ocean floor. Sir, that's 400 meters! Harold's eyes burned. Exactly where they were. He flipped the external lights. The beam cut through the dark, revealing the broken carcass of Trident Deep. Half-buried, silent, but still whole enough to recognize. Its nameplate shone faintly in the beam. Clark whispered, She's beautiful. Harold nodded. She was. He pressed his hand to the glass again. Welcome back, old friend. The sonar pinged once more. Not random, but deliberate. 3 short, 2 long, the same code. And then silence again. Clark's voice trembled. What does it mean, sir? Harold's lips barely moved. It means they heard us. The lights flickered. The pressure hissed. And for one moment the deep felt alive, as if something vast and ancient had opened its eyes. Harold turned away from the glass, his expression calm, almost peaceful. Prepare ascent. We're done here. Clark hesitated. That's it? After all this? Harold nodded. They've waited long enough. Now they can rest. The sub began to rise, leaving behind the wreck and its ghosts. And as they ascended through the endless black, the sonar pulsed one last time. A farewell from the deep. 3 short, 2 long. Silence. The ascent was slow, too slow. Sentinel X climbed through the heavy dark like a wounded beast fighting gravity. Every groan of metal felt like a breath. Every pulse on the sonar, a heartbeat fading behind them. Clark's face was pale in the glow of the instruments. Depth, 100 meters, 95. Harold stood by the viewport, motionless. He didn't blink, didn't move. The ocean outside was finally losing its color. Darkness giving way to a dim gray, the first sign of light. He whispered, They're letting us go. Clark turned to him. Who's they, sir? Harold looked back, his voice distant. Men who followed orders even after death. At 50 meters, the engines coughed. Pressure gauges spiked. Alarms flared. Clark shouted, We're venting compression. I can't stabilize. Harold grabbed the manual override. Hold her steady! The sub shuddered violently, the kind of shake that makes men remember prayers. Then, as suddenly as it came, it stopped. Stillness. They broke the surface with a roar of water and light. Spray slammed the glass. The engines wheezed like lungs, finally breathing air again. Clark slumped back into his seat. We made it. Harold smiled faintly. Some of us did. By the time they reached the dock, the deck swarmed with officers and medics. Admiral Reynolds stood in front, arms crossed, eyes sharp with anger and relief. The moment Harold stepped out, Reynolds barked, "What the hell was that, Mason? You went dark for 3 hours." Harold didn't answer. He just walked past him, dripping seawater, eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the base. Reynolds grabbed his arm. "Don't walk away from me! You risked a multi-billion-dollar vessel." Harold turned, his voice low. "I found something worth more than that." Reynolds froze. "What are you talking about?" Harold stared straight at him. "Trident Deep. She's down there." The Admiral blinked, disbelief flashing across his face. "That's impossible. That wreck was written off," Harold interrupted. "Like the men inside her." Reynolds frowned. "You're saying you found their remains?" Harold shook his head. "No, I found their voices." In the briefing room, the lights were harsh. The air stank of paperwork and coffee. A dozen officers crowded around as Harold replayed the sonar recordings. 3 short pulses, 2 long. Pause. Repeat. "Distress code?" someone muttered. "No," Harold said. "It's response." He looked at the Admiral. "That signal started when we came within range. It stopped when we left. That's not random." Reynolds leaned back, skeptical. "So you're telling me your old crew is still communicating?" Harold didn't smile. "They've been trying to for 40 years. We just stopped listening." Silence filled the room. No one spoke. No one laughed. Because deep down, they all knew. The ocean keeps its secrets longer than men keep their promises. After the debriefing, Harold walked alone down the dock. The night was cold, the sea calm again. He stopped at the edge, staring into the black mirror below. Clark joined him quietly. "Sir," he said softly, "what do you think they wanted to tell you?" Harold's gaze stayed on the water. "That they waited long enough." He tossed a small brass insignia, the badge from Trident Deep, into the sea. It sank slowly, disappearing in ripples that faded almost instantly. Clark said, "The Admiral's going to say you imagined it, you know." Harold smiled faintly. "Let him. Imagination doesn't leave sonar traces." They stood in silence. Then Harold looked up. Stars scattered across the sky like the reflection of the deep. "Clark," he said, "promise me something." "Yes, sir." "When you command your first crew, listen." "Listen to what, sir?" Harold's eyes softened. "To the silence. That's where the truth hides." Weeks later, a classified report was filed under a single line. Unidentified acoustic anomaly recorded near coordinates 27° N, 64° bow. Possible residual signal from lost vessel Trident Deep. Investigation pending. No further action was taken. No dives authorized. No records reopened. But every night, in that same stretch of ocean, a pulse still echoed beneath the waves. 3 short, 2 long. A rhythm that once meant distress, now meaning something else. Memory. Harold Mason never returned to the Navy. He moved inland, far from the sea. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled through the trees, he'd wake up thinking he heard it again. That deep, soft pulse from the dark below. He'd close his eyes, smile faintly and whisper, "I hear you." And somewhere, miles beneath the waves, the ocean whispered back,